Do you remember that conversation that you had saying, "Hey, I want to get into this. How do I get involved with professional wrestling?"
Yes, so, after I saw the commercial, I had watched their program maybe for a month or 2, not even, and I was watching what the women were doing, and, my knowledge of wrestling was this much. I mean, I didn't know anybody in the business, I didn't know much about it. I just had started watching WWF at the time. I was, like, 19 years old and was watching WWF and Global, and so my knowledge of the sport was very small, and I see this company, and they're based out of Philadelphia, and I'm like, "Well, I live in Philadelphia," and then I'm watching the show, and I see the women, and I'm like, "Well, I think I can do this." Not even knowing, what a bump was or the travel that was involved. I didn't know anybody there, but I figured let me try and give it a call and see what I can do because my job was pretty much like making me crazy and I wasn't happy. And so when I called the number, a woman had answered, and here it was Bob Ortiz's wife, Lex. Bob Ortiz was our ring announcer, and it was his wife, Lex, who is still dear friends to this day. They came to my wedding. Like they're such a good couple. But she was like, "Well, you have to meet Todd Gordon." And I wasn't even sure who Todd was at this time because again, I had just started watching their program. So I was like, okay, give me an address. And they give me the address, and I go down there with my dad, and my dad waits in the car because I didn't want to look like a baby and bring him inside. And here I'm like 20 at the time now. And it was a pawn shop. And it was like all bars on the windows and the doors, and had to be buzzed in and all this kind of stuff. But I meet Todd and he just looks at me and he says, "You're a really pretty girl. You won't even have to bump." And I remember saying to myself, "I don't what is a bump?" Like, I don't know what a bump is, but I didn't wanna seem like I was stupid, so I didn't ask him what it was. I was just like, "Okay, blah, blah, blah," and he's like, "Well, you're gonna go to wrestling school." So I'm thinking I'm gonna be a female wrestler. So I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I start training, and I train with JT Smith, and I was the only girl in the class. And, I remember, being told, you have to go to this one show, you're gonna meet Paul Heyman." So I'm like, "Okay, that's great." And I didn't know much about Paul at that time either because I wasn't really into WCW, yet. But I meet Paul and I go to the show in Montgomeryville, and he's just like, "You are going to be Miss Montgomeryville. You're gonna win a fake beauty pageant, and you're gonna be our guest timekeeper. You're gonna sit there and you're gonna ring the bell after every match." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "But when 911 comes out, you're gonna take a choke slam." And I was like, "I don't know what that is. We didn't do that in wrestling school yet." And he was just like, "What, you don't want to take it?" And I was like, "No, I'll do it. I just don't know what it is." And he's just like, "They'll give you a cue." I didn't even know what I was looking for, but here, Al 911, all he did was grab me by the hair, drag me in the ring, and pick me up and slam me. And it was just like that white noise where you heard absolutely a gasp and then you heard nothing. And they put me on a stretcher and they took me out the back and I went home. And I was like, "Oh, I don't even know if I did good or not. Like, did I do well? Are people happy?" I didn't get to go back to the locker room. And here I got a phone call, "Come back." I was like, "Okay." And I just kept going back. And then finally, the opportunity with the pit bulls came up. And then, it was a handshake deal at first and then a contract.
They really put you through the ringer, your first major bump, and it was almost like welcome to wrestling, you
Yeah,
know?
pretty much.
Yeah. Now, when you're training, I mean, being the only girl in the class, I mean, you're taking those bumps. I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's intense. The work that these men and women do now, of course, obviously, the stuff that they go through, they put themselves through. I'd imagine it was just so much work, so much stress on you to try to get the reps down and put it in and make sure that you were able to follow along.
Well, I at first, like I said earlier, I thought I was gonna be a female wrestler, so I was trying to train as a female wrestler. The night when I met Paul, he told me point blank, "Wrestling with women these days does not sell. It's not gonna get you over. What's gonna get you over is being a manager."
Right.
And I was just like, "Really?" And he's like, "Trust me." And I said, "Okay, I have no reason not to trust you. You know what you're talking about." And
Right.
he was 100% right, because at that time, female wrestling wasn't that big of a thing, and it seemed like when ECW would have a women's match, people were kind of like, and no, nothing against the women, because they work just as hard as the men do. We know that.
Mhm.
But it was like the guys in the crowd didn't really care at that point. And, Paul just said, when a manager's on the outside, you never know when they're going to get involved. And the guys want the women to come in and do something. And that's what's going to cause that big pop. And he was right, and now the women, most of the women are out working the men, which is tremendous. But back then, it wasn't where it was today. So, he knew what he was talking about. And I think he utilized me correctly.
Yeah, I definitely think the manager is just as important as the wrestler because the manager helps get over the talent. And
Hmm.
so your job was to help get the talent over and be a huge part of their storyline. And so did you prefer being a manager over being a wrestler? Did you like doing both?
I liked being a manager. I mean, they used me in a lot of mixed tags where I got to showcase what I can do and wrestle, and that was fun. But I just liked being on the outside, having the fan never know what I was gonna do next. That the kind of anticipation, is she gonna do something? Is she not gonna? Which 99% of the time I did something.
Yes.
So it was just fun to interact with the crowd that way and build up momentum. And it wasn't so much me getting my wrestler guy over, it became a partnership with each person that I worked with, and we gave each other the rub and helped each other's careers. That's the way I like to look at it. And I got to work with some really talented men in ECW, and it was the best time of my career.
It really was. I mean, you got to work with a who's who of people. You
Sure.
mentioned the Pit Bulls, Tommy Dreamer, Chris Candido. Oh man, Lance
Shane
Storm,
Shane
Shane
Douglas,
Douglas.
3.5 years with Shane. I probably would have worked with him until the end if he didn't leave for WCW, because him and I clicked from day one. And I still work with him to this day. We're still on the road doing shows and conventions together. So wonderful friendship with him. It's just, when you can trust the people that you work with, that's a big deal. And you're putting your body on the line to trusting these guys, and having them use me in the way that they did, because a lot of the old timers didn't want to put the girls over back then.
Really?
I had Bruno Sammartino tell me to my face, like, women are kind of irrelevant in this business. And I'm just like, wow, and I respected him for everything that he gave to wrestling, but for him to tell me that to my face was kind of like a letdown. And I was just like, wow, and he's like, I don't think women belong in the business. And a lot of those older generation wrestlers feel the same way. So I was just like, well, I just want to prove myself that I'm not some girl who just stands there and looks cute. Like, I want to work. And I tried in my power to prove that I was one of the boys.
Yeah, I mean, you took like a lot of bumps,
Yeah.
really. I just was watching a promo you did with Tommy Dreamer where you just slapped him and he gave you a pile driver like right in the middle of the ring. Do you remember the first time you were talking about Shane Douglas earlier? Do you remember the first time you met him and were talked about being paired up?
So he tells this story. I don't really remember it like he does, but he tells a story of after he went to WWF, he came back and he was in somewhere in New York, I guess we were, and he was just visiting. He wasn't even working for the company at the time. And I guess I was doing a promo with the Pitbulls, and I looked really nervous to him. And because initially I was very uncomfortable speaking, and I would get nervous and I would fidget with my hands a lot, and he noticed that, so he pulled me aside and he was just giving me tips on, what to do. how to think while you're trying to get to the next line. You could laugh. Like if you notice in a lot of his promos, he'll do a little laugh. He's thinking of his next line when he's laughing. So he was just giving me little tips. And Paul told Shane he watched him talk to me that evening and it clicked. These two are going to be together. He saw something in that conversation, which he didn't even hear the conversation. He just saw our body language and he wanted to put us together right then and there.